we're talking to, this semester, powerful female executives in the music and entertainment industry. And tonight, we have a woman who I've known for more years than both of us want to acknowledge. But she'll tell you her humble beginnings. But her name is Alissa Pollack, and she works for an organization I'm sure you're all familiar with called iHeart. And her title is, she's the Executive Vice President of Music Initiatives and Partner Integrations. And we'll get into exactly what all that stuff means this evening. This is a forum for you guys to learn something. So we can sit here and chat as we did on the way out in the car, but that's not going to be as productive as if you guys, contributing and being involved. Obviously, a lot of you, or all of you, hopefully have submitted questions, but I encourage you, if there's something you want to say, just raise your hand and we'll go for it. So, I'm trying to keep this as informal as possible. And the idea is when you walk out of here tonight, you have a perspective and have some knowledge about an area of the music industry that you might not have known enough about or any about. So I met Alissa, I want to say more years ago than I can remember. I was working at a record label, and she was working with a syndicated radio show hosted by a woman named Dr. Judy, and I think the show was called Love Lines. Love Phones, right. Sorry, Love Phones. Love Lines is another show. And Love Phones was carried here in New York on Z100, the big top 40 station. And she was at the record companies trying to get some additional content for the show, as I recall, looking for musicians, celebrities to come on the show and talk with Dr. Judy about their problems and whether anything had to do with their love lives. Obviously, that was a long time ago. And
20 years.
That's all? Wow. But actually, I'd like to go back in time further and just like say, okay, so here you are today, here at William Patterson University, but how did it start for you? I mean, how did you even get to be working on Love Phones?
Okay, so I actually had a very interesting road to my job. I was getting my master's in counseling, and that was a little bit of a sidetrack from the law degree I wanted to get. And so I needed an internship, and I love music, so I was like, what can I do that has music and counseling, which is not an easy thing to put together, but I applied for an internship at Z100 for a call and advice radio show called Love Phones, and my initial job was just to speak to people who got on air and needed more counseling or who never made it on air, and then I was to counsel them. And I graduated, and during that summer they asked if I wanted to just kind of stay on with them until I applied for a real job. And somewhere in that process, I ended up never leaving and ended up in radio and not in law or psychology. So kind of got derailed a little bit, but it was a great experience, obviously, because again, it was music is something I'm passionate about, and so it turned out to be actually a great mistake, twist in the road.
So you were at Love Phones, and you were doing that part-time?
I was an intern.
An intern.
And then I was hired as a staff member on the show. And that show was then taken on by a syndication company, which I became then an employee of the syndication company. And that syndication company was eventually purchased by a company that became Clear Channel, which just became iHeart. So actually, from my internship at Z100, I've actually never had another real job with another company. I've actually been with the same company for the entire 20 years.
Which is a very unique situation in the broadcast music entertainment industry, to spend your entire career in one corporate entity, even though it's morphed over the years. So you were offered a full-time job. What was your full-time job going to be?
So my original full-time job was supposed to be affiliate relations, which is selling the radio shows to radio stations all over the country. And I was like, well, I'm not a salesperson. I can't do that, but I kind of needed a job and I had school loans, so I took it, and I've been a salesperson for 20 years.
When you say you selling radio shows, I mean, so you'd call up a radio station and say, do you want to buy this? It's a little more complex than that, but what were some of the tools that you had access to that might have made a programmer say they might be interested in a particular program you had?
Well, my joke is it was my psychology degree because I was able to get along with a lot of people. But really just, for me, it was always about I had to believe in the show or the service I was selling and just be passionate about it. So, we had one sheets and your standard marketing tools, but really it was selling on the belief of, the show and something I really was happy to put my name behind, and I never actually did sell any of the things I didn't believe in. So it kind of worked out good because establishing credibility with the people that I was talking to, I think, was a very important thing for me in my career.
So while you were there, you met a fellow named Rich Meyer. Mm-hmm. And Rich is one of these brainiacs who sees things and develops things. Yeah, he's the mad scientist in the laboratory. And he was messing around with some technology and some ideas, and he came up with a thing that would allow people to monitor what a radio station was doing in any given market in the United States. And if I'm not mistaken, that he originally, I think it was called Mediabase from the beginning?
It was Monday Morning Replay.
Monday Morning Replay.
And then
right.
Mediabase.
Mediabase.
And when I met Rich, it was a service that was on floppy disk where we were monitoring, once a week in 35 markets. And today we monitor 1,800 radio stations 24 hours a day. And it's really
So you guys might be scratching your heads and going, so monitoring a radio station and then putting on a floppy disk. What the hell? What's the value of that? Well, I can tell you that I was a promotion man, and my job was to get airplay at the radio stations. And I had a friend who was a programmer, and he would give me the old floppy disks after he was done with them. And I put it in my little IBM ThinkPad, and I would be amazed to see that the guy in Minneapolis, after he played that song, he would say this about the artist, then he would play this commercial, then he'd play this other commercial, and then he would promote this event that station was doing, and then he'd introduce the song by another artist. And I could see, without listening, what this guy was doing and how many times he was playing my record or other people's records, and it was like competitive information. It was like manna from heaven, like, wow, this is cool. Now, this was, all right, he gave me, he was done with it, so this information was at least 30 days, if not more, older, but it was like, wow, so somebody's listening, and that's how, I guess that's how it was, they were listening and writing it down.
Yeah, it actually started with people that would sit and listen to the station 24 hours. So even now, we still have people that will reconcile the data. We did end up switching to technology and a computer that was able to identify the music, but we still employ people that can identify virtually any song at any point in the song by listening to about 7 seconds of it. So you can imagine this is not a lot of people that can qualify for a job like this, but it was built on people listening and identifying all the songs and the commercials and things like that. And then we actually moved on, interestingly enough, not a lot of people know this, but when we did go to digital finally, we were using Shazam as our technology. So a lot of you probably use Shazam, the app, but we actually used the Shazam technology at the time, and we actually helped develop the Shazam technology into what it is today. And when we actually stopped using them a couple of years ago, and that's when they actually came out with the app. But the Shazam technology would then identify the songs, and then we would have people that went through and they would just look at what the computer might have missed or anything that looked strange to them. So there was an extra, process of reconciling after the computer identified the music.
So you were probably the first person who was actually out there promoting this technology, or at the time, these floppy disks to. So who was the customer? Who was gonna, why would somebody in Seattle care about monitoring a radio station in New York?
Because, first of all, there's a lot of stations around the country that consider other radio stations their standard. So, and there's also medium and small markets that don't necessarily have the same research. So if I'm, in a small town, I know that whatever Z100 is programming or, Hot 97, I know that they've put a lot of research and effort into deciding what those songs are. So for me, a guy in a small market that doesn't have that research, it's good for me to kind of look at what that station is doing. And obviously it's also very important for stations in a market to look at their competitors and what their competitors are doing. So over the years, it really transitioned into a tool that the entire music industry at this point kind of bases their whole, their bonus plans are based on Mediabase, and everything's based on Mediabase because it really is what everybody uses to program their radio stations. Because again, they're looking at people they think are the same as them or similar to them, or they're looking at their competitors to see what they should be doing. The music industry uses it. We actually have something called real time. So now you can literally see, within a 30-second delay what a radio station is playing. So most, it's almost like I call it like the stock ticker of the music industry, because you'll actually have record executives watching by the minute how many spins Jason Derulo has because he's going for #1 against another artist, and they need to know how many spins that they have compared to the other artist. And it's a tool that, people use in negotiating for artists and events. So if I'm a radio station and I was the first one to play Justin Bieber, I'm going to use that with the record company to say, hey, I know that guy across the street from you wants to work with Justin Bieber, but I was the first one to play him, and here's the proof. So it's even recently transitioned to brands and artists working together. Obviously, I think one of the biggest things, and a lot of what you'll see in the future. So brands are even using a system like this, because if I want to look at markets that are, important markets for my product, I can see who the most played in that market is, or, things like that. So it's really, the customer base is growing by the minute. It's also, our airplay is used to make up all the charts on most of the shows that you listen to. So when you hear Ryan Seacrest American Top 40, it's actually based on the Mediabase data, and as well as a lot of other, countdown shows that you hear. So it's kind of used in a lot of different ways.
So I'll bet there's some of you sitting out there who are musicians. Why should I care about what radio stations are programming or playing? I just want to make music. Well, I'll tell you, if you live in a capitalistic society and you want to make money, and I think it was it Edison? Somebody just came out, recent research, yet again, that radio is the dominant exposure medium, and it's the tool that most people use for discovery. So if you care about getting your music to as many people as possible, then you have to understand the mechanism of radio, and how radio, if they play your music and they play it in a significant rotation, people are going to hear it. When they hear it, if they like your music, they go out and purchase it whatever way they can, whether it's physical goods or digital. So from this class point of view, I wanted to make certain everybody understood that we're not just sitting here, talking about some technology and some random way of doing things. The connection between radio and music is very close. It's very close. The radio stations need to put something on their signal besides the commercials. So in between the commercials, they play your music. And then you want to sell music, and so how can you get your music heard by the most amount of people? And that would be via radio. So I should have set that up as a preamble here to the class tonight, just so everybody understands why we're talking about this. And Alissa works for the largest media company, right? Mm-hmm. And I would say in the world. Yeah. Right. So I mean, iHeart has more radio stations, internet stations, and by the way, it's hard to drive around without seeing an iHeart billboard. Some of them are still branded as Clear Channel, but so you're dealing with the biggest company in the world. And as you, as a musician, want to get your music out to people, this is one of the major entities that exist in the world that can take your music and bring it to a different level and have more people hear it. So other than radio stations playing your music, there's other things that iHeart can offer.
Mm-hmm. So we own 850 radio stations currently.
That's just in the United States.
That's just in the United States. We don't actually own outside the United States anymore. We did have Australia, but we sold it. So it is 850 in the United States. We have the corresponding websites to that. But we also have the iHeartRadio app, which I hope everybody has seen. And within that app, we stream 1,800 stations, not necessarily our own. We also stream competitive radio stations in there as well as custom stations that we create just for that. So for a lot of new artists, we work with them to put together different ways to expose their music in the app, digitally. We've actually developed some great programs this year to help break artists, something called On the Verge. So we use that program. We actually poll all of our program directors in every format every week on new music, and we try and identify songs that everybody kind of feels has hit potential. And then we put that into the On the Verge program, which is on-air exposure on the radio, but again, also digital and all of the platforms that we have. So it's pretty great exposure. But we work with every format, every demo, and we do like to do something for every artist, not just the Katy Perrys and the obvious big artists. I think there's something we could do for virtually anybody, because we actually have pretty much 100% U.S. coverage, so we actually do want to make sure that we're appealing to the taste of everybody.
So you said there's something called On the Verge, and then if I remember correctly, there was something, Rising Star, something with Macy's.
Macy's Rising Star.
Yeah. So how does that work?
So Macy's Rising Star is a program we have with Macy's that's also about emerging artists, and artists submit themselves to this platform that we've built where we expose the music through commercials and digitally and across our assets, and then fans can vote on the music that they like. So it's completely a fan-voted contest, 100% down to the end, and the winner of that gets to, great opportunities, like they get to open at the iHeart Music Festival in Las Vegas, and get exposed to all of our radio station programmers and things like that. So it's definitely another great program for artists to be a part of, because even the ones at capital cities actually was part of the contest. They didn't win, but you see that they went on to actually do great things, and they had a couple of hits. So it's a great program regardless of whether you actually win.
So under the iHeart umbrella, there's another division. It's mostly, from my familiarity, is Premier.
Yeah.
It's radio syndication, which is kind of where your roots were
Exactly.
originally. So can you, I know Ryan Seacrest has a syndicated countdown, but I'm sure there's other shows in the Premier world.
Yes, we have Mario Lopez, and we have Nikki Sixx, and we have Rush Limbaugh, and someone named Delilah, who's on our AC stations. I love how everyone always knows Delilah. It doesn't matter where I go, Delilah's the one.
Now, why did you say that? Just
do you love Delilah? She does, right?
Yeah. She's very soothing.
Great love advice.
I know, and it's funny because the target is supposed to be women more my age and older, but no matter where I go, everyone loves Delilah.
Well, what's amazing is Delilah here's carried in New York. I used on LTW, right?
Exactly.
But she's up in, is it Seattle?
Yeah, she's actually in Seattle.
So you listen to her, she's in Seattle.
I'm very proud to say I am the one who got her on Light FM in New York. That was my job at the time. But so Premier Radio is actually the syndication arm of iHeart. And even though we're owned by iHeart and we work with iHeart, it's only 30% of our business. So again, we're doing business with every other radio broadcaster. So Premier Radio actually works with 6,000 radio stations, and we work with 101 countries. So you can hear Ryan Seacrest on army bases in the middle of Africa and all over the world. So basically the premise of the Premier division is that we offer out content that stations normally couldn't do on their own, and in exchange they'll give us commercial time on the radio station, and with that we'll build a radio network that we monetize. So we can go back to Macy's, let's say, and say, hey, we've got this Ryan Seacrest countdown, it's on 300 radio stations, would you like to buy a spot on all of those radio stations in one shot? So it's a very successful model, and we do have a ton of services. There's shows, but there's also, again, Mediabase is under that umbrella, and we have a lot of other research and production libraries and all kinds of different things that fall under that umbrella.
It's fascinating if you think about it. Clear Channel is almost like a national radio station. Most Americans are not familiar with that model because, like, for example, in England, you have the BBC.
Right.
And so wherever you go in England, you can hear the same radio station. But in America, till you guys really started. I mean, so there's a syndicated morning show that
Right.
is heard in,
So there's Elvis Duran, who you guys are probably familiar with. He's like on about 80 radio stations right now. And then followed by Ryan Seacrest, which is 160 radio stations, I want to say. So, there are definitely more than ever. Syndication is big across because you have a lot of radio groups that now just own a ton of stations, and they found that it was more cost efficient for them to put, someone that they know is a great talent across, again, stations that are in these small markets that never would be able to afford a Ryan Seacrest or an Elvis Duran on their station. So, it works, but you will hear
it works
a
both
lot.
ways.
Yeah.
It works both ways. The station is getting the advantage of a national air personality, and at the same time, his audience keeps going up
Exactly.
and up. So it's a
great
it's a
platform.
win-win. And then, do those radio stations have to? How do they compensate for the use of those services? Getting Elvis Duran or Ryan Seacrest?
Yeah, so for the morning show, sometimes there is cash involved, but in most cases, it's mostly about, bartering airtime in exchange for the content, and then us, again, creating a network that we go out and sell to advertisers.
And again, the music they play is the music that's going to be heard across the country. So a spin on Ryan Seacrest's show gets played on how many stations, you said?
Well, the weekend show is over 300 stations.
So in 300 different markets, Ryan Seacrest, when he plays a song, it's heard.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's pretty powerful.
it's a powerful exposure tool for any musician, any wannabe, any artist, anybody who's got a CD. And that's why I thought it's extremely important we talk about this and make you aware of this. So aside from this, you're involved with iHeart, you're with Mediabase, and there's a couple other products you have that you're
Yeah.
in your...
I mean, again, after 20 years, I have morphed into 5 people who left, and now I'm those 5 people in one. So I actually have 2 bosses. So on one side, I oversee all the research products at Mediabase. We have something called Rate the Music that you guys may or may not have heard of, and we now work with Shazam and something called Big Champagne. So there's a lot of research products that we have under our umbrella that we work with radio stations and record labels on. And then on the other side, under my other boss, I do artist relations for Premiere and iHeart. So that's the iHeart Music Festival, or J-Lo has a new album coming out, so we'll work with her record label to come up with things that, a great example we just did was Taylor Swift when she came out with her new album. So we had her, for the first time ever, co-host Ryan Seacrest's morning show, but we also had her do Elvis Duran, and, we have someone named Kane and John Jay and Rich, and so she literally took over every top 40 show that we have, and also Mario Lopez. So she did 1 million shows in one day. So for that entire week, it was Taylor Swift hosting all of our shows, and that was a huge, we'd never done that before, and we did it with Diet Coke, which was great because we were able to tie in an advertiser, which is something we obviously try and do more and more now. So it was really an incredible big look for her. And then the end was her doing the album release party on the roof of a building with a helicopter flying over. So that is something I'm very fortunate to kind of get to work with, with artists. But we also do things, again, with emerging artists. So for me, I personally love working with the artists that no one's heard of yet and are just starting out, because it's really great to watch the transition between when, they come to our building and they're, very innocent and they've never done anything, and then 3 months later, you see them and you can't get near them because they're being mobbed by people and they have a crew of 20 people around them, and you're like, what just happened? It's really a fascinating thing to kind of watch.
So can we take a peek inside Alyssa's crystal ball and say, what do you think that you've heard something that maybe people in this room haven't heard of yet, and they, a couple of weeks or a couple of months from now, it will matter?
Yeah, I should have came prepared for that, because there's definitely a lot of them. George Ezra is somebody that's big and breaking. Hosier was something that I was all about 8 months before it ever got near radio, because we deal with a lot of the research products, we're now able to look across a host of data points and say, whoever this person is, they're going to be big because they're popping on Shazam and the streaming services and the social networks, but they have no airplay yet. So I'm blanking on any great
Okay.
examples right now, but I will say the new Mumford & Sons that came out yesterday, my new favorite song right now. It's awesome.
It is. You glossed over Rate the Music. Could you just explain to people what's Rate the Music? Maybe some people here have been
Yeah, so
listening.
Rate the Music is, it's been around for probably 15 years or so now, and it's a database we have where people who are very passionate music listeners join so that they can give us their opinions on music. And there's a couple of different uses for it. So we have a couple hundred radio stations that use it because it helps them determine what the audience thinks about certain music that they're considering putting on, you know, how their morning show bits are doing, things like that. The record labels use it because when Britney Spears has a new album coming out, they're not really sure which is the right single to go out with, so they'll have us test something like that in the database to determine whether or not there seems to be more potential for one song versus another. They might want to try and determine whether a song is going to cross over from one format to another. We've had situations where Lionel Richie is one of my favorite cases. He had an album coming out that he wanted to target a younger demo, and nobody believed that that could happen. And we actually tested it, and we found out that not only was the younger audience familiar with Lionel because of Nicole at that point, but it was actually a very positive response to him versus what they were expecting. So they released the album because of that study, and it actually did very well. So there's really a lot of different uses for Rate the Music, but it really is another system that people use to help them determine what music they're going to play and what music is going to be released. So it's kind of cool.
I used to dabble a bit with company Big Champagne, which you guys now own.
No,
So
we partner with.
you partner with,
Yep.
okay. So what value, I mean, what do you do with Big Champagne? Because they're a very research-driven company.
Yeah, so Big Champagne actually originally started as a company that measured the legal and illegal downloads that were going on. They were very much ahead of the curve on that.
Right.
So it was kind of interesting because at first people hated them because they kept feeling like they were perpetuating stealing music online, but obviously they weren't. They were just measuring what was actually happening. And it was really interesting because they were, you know, what people like and what they actually do or say they like and what they actually do are two different things. So it was really interesting to see what people would steal versus what they were willing to buy. And so over the years, that system really evolved, and they did a lot of great deals with other partners. So they have YouTube information that they're tracking, and Facebook and Twitter and things like that. So it's another great tool for us to kind of examine how an artist is doing. So we can see, you know, the radio single might be one song, but we can see that people are sharing and, you know, searching for other songs on the album. So that's an interesting thing to look at because it tells you what the audience likes versus what they're being fed. They have another great measurement which shows fan engagement. So I don't know if anyone's heard of Janelle Monáe, but she has a fan engagement score equal to the Beatles and Taylor Swift, whereas, you know, someone like Gautier only has, you know, the fans only like one of his songs, which we know makes sense. So it's interesting to see whether the fans are about the song or about the artist, depending on how many songs of that artist they're really engaging with. And it's a great way to also see, again, Hozier stood out, George Ezra, all of them stood out in this service because it's socially, I feel like nowadays the audience is kind of telling us what they want, but we as radio sometimes think we know better, so we don't always listen quick enough, but it's a really great tool because it's really tracing what the consumers are doing, and so you're able to really identify songs and artists much earlier than when we get to them because, again, socially you can see that people are talking about them and tweeting about them and sharing them on Facebook, which is, you know, really great information.
Then you have another tool called Rate the Music.
That's what we just talked about.
Okay, but that's in part of, use Big Champagne as part of that?
No, it's separate.
It's separate, okay.
Yeah, but
And then-
we have a new chart that we just created, and we take all of these into one chart now. It's the Mediabase Power Playlist, and we're basically taking airplay, streaming, sales, video, and Shazam for the first time ever, and we're putting that all into one chart. So what's great is on the airplay chart only, that's just what radio is playing. But in this particular chart, you're letting the artists that have great social networks or big YouTube views, they're getting credit for that even if they're not as much on the radio. So again, a Justin Bieber or a One Direction, they're getting credit for all of the amazing social activity they have, even if they haven't gotten a lot of airplay yet. So
I was, I guess, mistaken. I thought Rate the Music had some interactive with the audience, where they were, if a radio station would solicit and call.
did I not explain that enough?
Well, no, I was confused. I thought
Okay.
I was back in the day. They would take a cross section of the country of the feedback from the audience and use that as part of it.
We do. Okay, I'm sorry, I left that part out. So of the people in the database, every week we send out a test of the top songs in each format, and we test it amongst this national database of people. And then those scores are something that are seen within Mediabase, so the programmers can use that, again, as a gauge. It's much more of a predictive tool, because, again, Mediabase is just measuring what's happening, whereas Rate the Music and Big Champagne and Shazam are actually kind of more predictive services, because Rate the Music is very passionate audience that are voting on this music. So typically it's about 4 to 6 weeks ahead of the curve on regular radio research. So a lot of times, again, you're getting earlier passionate scores on these songs before they're, it's catching up on the airplay side.
Any of you get a phone call ever from a radio station or research company asking for your opinions on music? No? No.
This is an online tool that we also have something
Right.
called Critical Mass Media, which
Right.
calls people on the phone and asks them,
Right.
what their opinions are on music.
What about, was the other, it's M-Score?
M-Score. So M-Score is a tool, it's the first ever tool that actually shows the consumer behavior without them saying it. So we're measuring the actual behavior versus their opinion and what they're telling us they're doing. So are you guys familiar with the PPM, the Personal People Meter in Arbitron by chance, which is now Nielsen?
You've not heard of it?
No. So there's about 70,000 people in the U.S. that wear like a little beeper, and that allows this company Nielsen to track everything they're exposed to during the day from a music perspective, and that's how radio stations are rated now. So if you're listening to Z100, they get the credit for it. If you're listening to Q104, they get the credit for it. So what we did was we took the data from Arbitron and we overlaid the actual audio on top of that. So at any given minute, we know when one of the people carrying this in their car, we know that if they heard a song on the radio and they switched from Z100 to PLJ or from PLJ to Q104, we have a baseline for each radio station, so we know at any given time during the day whether the people tune out, how much they tune out or stay in. So that's the baseline. So now we're able to show when a song, somebody is actually staying longer than they typically would, or if they're tuning out faster, which again helps us determine what somebody's opinion is. But a good example on that is Chris Brown, because if people were to call and ask whether you like Chris Brown, a lot of people don't want to admit that. But when people are in their car, they were not turning off Chris Brown and they were rocking out to his song. So again, it's a really good indication of the actual behavior versus what somebody's willing to admit that they like.
Now, that behavior then is a tool that a programmer can use to determine how much or how little
Exactly.
to program a song.
So it's great to kind of see when a song is starting to burn, or whether it's really reacting. So a lot of times we'll have a new song that comes out, and it really takes a while before it starts getting a positive score. But you'll also see when something comes out and immediately people are staying and listening to that song and enjoying it. And then on the reverse, you'll see when they start getting sick of hearing Lady Gaga for the 20th time in one day, and you can see they're starting to tune out a lot faster. And that's a great indication to a radio programmer that it's probably time to kind of play this song less. And it's really interesting because when we look at it, sometimes people will adjust based on that, and you'll see the score actually goes up again because people, it's actually an interesting thing to find the right balance, what the sweet spot is of how many times people want to hear a song or not. So it's a great tool, again, to figure out whether your audience is getting sick of what you're playing.
So much for the vision of somebody sitting in a studio with a box of CDs or whatever, or MP3s, and just picking things out. There's always
Too much research now.
There's a lot of thinking and thought process that goes through.
Overthinking, I think.
And there's a thought that maybe it's overthought, but understanding that your favorite on-air announcer is not picking necessarily that music. They're being told or being given a list to work off of that has been researchedly and scientifically looked at. And do sales enter the equation anymore?
Oh yeah, absolutely, because that's another measurement. So all of those are indications. In fact, part of what I do is when we do these programs with artists, I actually will go back on the back end and check what kind of, ROI, or return on investment, we call it, there was. So I can see that when we, when we start an On the Verge artist, I can see the social went up 23%. I can see that the sales went up in all the markets that our radio stations are in that are playing the song. So what's interesting is, again, there's so much data out in the world that it's very easy and very quick to be able to determine what is a hit nowadays. Because if we're playing a song a lot and people aren't buying it or streaming it, that pretty much is telling us that the audience isn't connecting with it. While conversely, if we're playing a song and all of a sudden, sales shoot up 300%, we know we're on to something because people are reacting to it. So sales is definitely an important indication of whether a song is connecting.
Because back in traditional radio days, a radio station might determine what they play based upon sales. And it was not easy, but one could manipulate the sales story to convince the programmer that this particular song is doing better than you would think, because they would send people out and buy singles or whatever, or purchase downloads. But now, multiple ways you can sort of cut through the BS and see what is legitimate, what's real.
Because iTunes is really hard to manipulate like that. So
Right. You could, but it'd be very expensive.
You could, but it's very, exactly.
So iTunes is a very quick way of seeing what the public's tastes are like. You had a question, sir?
Well, related to that, I was saying then the DJ has almost no freedom at all anymore. I mean, they kept getting less and less, but now it's zero.
Virtually nothing.
They just spin, press button.
I think there are some DJs out there that have built their entire reputation and personality around that, and they might still have that flexibility, but for the most part,
they wouldn't be in major markets.
Not really. But again, you might get, this is a bad example because it doesn't play music, but someone who's at the level of a Howard Stern that wields enough power that people are going to let him do whatever he wants, he might be able to pick music, but most of the other jocks are not. Even Ryan, he will have input because, again, he has his own relationships with artists, so he might want to do something with J-Lo, but he wouldn't do it without probably running it by the people at the radio station. But I think a lot of people are okay with it because, again, the music is chosen because there's so many indications that say that people like it, so we don't get too many arguments about it. But I will say, us as a company, we do this weekly test at something called Clear Channel Music Meeting, or I should say now iHeart Music Meeting, and every week we're sending out this music to every programmer in the country, regardless of whether they're in New York or Fairbanks, Alaska. So we are trying to get the input of all the programmers to really see what music they like and what they want to get behind. So we're trying to give them as much input as possible and not just have it be some dictatorship, but it's definitely something that we're making what we think are the smartest choices on what people are going to like.
So then now the role of the independent promo man, does it exist anymore?
It does. Yeah, because, and now labels, because they've pared down a lot on their staff and expenses, I feel like it's actually coming back a little bit because they're hiring out and contracting people to help them work the records to the radio stations. And so there's always been that relationship of, making connecting the artist and the radio station and trying to do things that benefit all parties. It doesn't always work out that way, but that's the hope,
There's also a lot of small independent labels that are still want to be competitive, and so they'll employ the outsourced services to get their music at least heard or get the feedback from the programmers to know what the next step
I mean,
might
the
be.
great thing is the internet has very much, I think, leveled the playing field, because there's a lot of artists like Adele, you know, that came from independent labels in London, in the UK, and they did eventually partner with a major label at some point just to help them from a manpower perspective, but people are discovering music all the time in different places, so it's not like only the major label songs that they're pushing are the ones that, and that's what I was kind of saying earlier about looking at who the audience is really responding to, because you know, a lot of these artists have huge followings online, you know, and on streaming services and YouTube, and they don't even have a record label. They have an independent label, or they've never been, you know, heard by the mainstream yet. But you can get your music out there, and if it's a hit, you have a chance to kind of expose it.
The one thing you can say about Alissa is she's very passionate about what she believes in, and her passion bleeds over to other areas of the entertainment industry, and she's involved in quite a few charitable endeavors. Just wondered maybe you could touch on a few of them, because I know you're on a couple of boards.
Yeah. Okay.
I look at her in awe, and I go, she does this, this, and this. She's involved in this and this. She's always answers her own phone 9 times out of 10, and yet she, you know, the one thing that is her signature event every year is coming up soon. It benefits the City of Hope.
Should I give the whole background on this?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm actually on 3 charity boards and at least 3 other committees. I'm very charity driven. The first one was something called City of Hope, which is a research cancer and treatment facility in Los Angeles. And the real reason I was invited to be on the committee originally is because somebody wanted me to hopefully get my company to buy a table. And this was many years ago, and I walked in the room, and it was pretty much the president of every record label and myself, and I was nowhere near them in title or salary or power, and I was like, ooh, I'm not really sure how I'm going to keep up with this group. I was very nervous and intimidated, and so the first day they didn't even recognize that I was in the room. They forgot I was even there, and so I went back to work that day, and I was like, oh boy, I don't know what I'm going to do. These guys are going to really, you know, show up with some great stuff next week. I better get creative. And so I spent that whole week trying to figure out ways, you know, different things I could do. So I ended up getting Barry Manilow to donate tickets and meet and greets, which raised like $50,000. And then I was in the kitchen and I ran into a salesperson, and she's like, hey, you know, Chevy's trying to get the new Escalade into a music video. And I was like, okay, will they donate an Escalade to my charity, and I'll try and get one of these presidents to put it in a video? And they're like, yeah. So by the time I got back to the meeting the next week, nobody in the room had done anything. And I had, you know, probably raised $300,000 by doing just, you know, random things. And it was a great lesson because, you know, again, they didn't acknowledge me, and they were like, went around the room, and they were like, okay, that's the end of the meeting. And I'm like, excuse me, sir, you know, I have, and they were like, who is this girl? But the greatest lesson of all was you don't have to be, you know, you don't have to write a personal check for $50,000. It's about creativity and about passion and figuring out. So within my own job, I forgot, I left out the most important part. I decided I was going to throw a wine tasting dinner, even though I don't really drink and I've never thrown an event. So I put together this wine tasting that almost was a disaster, and at the last minute, somehow it became, you know, it was successful. And now we're about to have our 9th one. We've raised over $3 million. And now I'm constantly asked to be on charity boards because I joke I'm the youngest and poorest one on all of these boards, but that's the reason why I do well, is because I actually have to figure out ways to raise money other than a lot of the people that will just write a check and never do anything else for the rest of the year. But the most important part of it is, I think it's the best thing you can do is give back. But even from a professional standpoint, it's allowed me to make relationships with people that probably would never have answered my phone call, you know, during any of those times. But you know,
but they do now.
They do, and it's been great. And so the other one is Musicians on Call, which is a program where musicians go to the bedsides of patients and play for them.
But so
Okay,
Talk
sorry.
about the wine dinner. I mean,
So the wine dinner. So we started with, we prayed for 300 people. We got kind of close the first year. Now we're over 500 every year. We kind of can't even fit people in anymore. And it's really become probably one of the best attended events in the music industry.
and it's a real auction.
And it's a real
And
auction.
if you're a wine head, and there are a lot of executives in the entertainment industry who live and breathe for food and wine.
Exactly.
And so she gets people to donate.
Yeah, so the way it's structured is each table is actually sponsored by somebody. So L.A. Reid is one of our sponsors, and he fills that table with wine. And so we have all these different people that come and serve the wine at each of the tables. And we have all the record companies and radio companies that buy tables to come and get served this wonderful wine. But it's really, what's great about the event is it's one night where there's no politics and no competitiveness, and everybody's drunk and having fun. And so I love getting pictures of people I know hate each other, like hugging and high-fiving. And it's really just like, because, at the end of the day, it reminds everybody, like, what's important, because I lost my dad. I created this, 9 years ago for the reason that I kind of explained, and I ended up, unfortunately, losing my dad to cancer, which made the event very personal for me, and it really made it personal for everyone else too, because I was like, listen, we come here every year and we love it because, we get to hang out, we get drunk and we have fun, but this is a reminder as to why we're really in this room, and the music industry, it's interesting, we are jaded because every day we're working with music artists and doing fun things, but there are people out there that, I got $60,000 for someone to meet Katy Perry. That paid for, a program for 2 years at a hospital. I mean, so it's very powerful stuff to be able to give back. It's so easy because, again, I think a lot of people become intimidated by charity. If you think to yourself, I'm just one person, what am I going to do? But it's really about donating your time or finding a creative way to work that into your life. And that's what I kind of did with my job. So because I'm in marketing and sales, I figured out how, with almost every program I put together, I'm like, by the way, can I stick 2 more people at the end of the line of that meet and greet and, auction it off so we can benefit this charity or that charity? And most people are used to me doing it at this point, so they're very cool about it. But we've raised millions just by sticking 2 people at the back of a meet and greet line that 300 people are at anyway, so it's really been one of the best things I've done, and hopefully it'll be my legacy. I think it's far more important than anything I've ever done. But the Musicians on Call, so what I was going to say is I lost my dad, so what I did was I actually started a program with one of my charities, Musicians on Call, and launched a music program at City of Hope. So it becomes more and more personal to me, as we go, because I think charity is very personal at the end of the day, right? But I think it's a great thing for you guys as you develop your careers. I think it's so important personally and professionally to just have that be something that you do, because it's very rewarding and fulfilling. But again, but it also is a great networking thing if that's, and I don't care what anyone's agenda is with charity. If you're still doing good, it's okay.
Anybody have any questions? We can go to some of the questions you guys sent in. Sean Clark wanted to ask you, what was the greatest challenge you had at iHeartRadio? What has been the greatest?
Okay, so I'm going to give the most honest answer ever for this room, which is staying relevant. We were just talking about this in the car. I've been with the same company for 20 years. It's been different ownership. I'm now 45 versus 25, and just staying relevant, staying, it's a very relationship-oriented business. So again, continuing to keep those relationships intact, but also having to reprove myself every time there's a new boss or there's a new owner of the company, and it's something that. It's a blessing to be at the same company for 20 years, but also, again, you always have to make sure that you're evolving and changing and making sure that your job is still needed on the payroll. So,
I suppose I'd be derelict if I didn't bring up the obligatory question. So, it's a very male-dominated industry. There's a lot of chauvinism, obviously, and I wondered how you, as a little pipsqueak at 25 years old, 20 years ago, what speed bumps or impediments might have you run into, and how do you handle things like that? Because I'm sure there's a lot of female students here who would like to get involved, but they probably want to know what challenges, opportunities they're going to face.
I think it's a hard question, but I personally never allowed or thought about being a woman as something that held me back. And so I knew that, there were
Was it something that helped you?
You know what? I think, yes, I think it helps, and it's also a challenge. I think it helps because, I can be on the phone with somebody and be like, oh my God, I love you, and blah, blah, blah. There's no way a guy would say that to another guy. So just the way I can talk to men, again, not, and I don't mean in a flirty way, but just, you could just say things as a girl that a guy would not say. I think girls are sometimes more compassionate or more easily, we communicate better sometimes. And so, I've actually mediated guys talking to guys. I'm like, Tommy feels like you're not really supporting him. And, and so I think from that perspective, it's actually been obviously very good to be a girl. But on the other hand, you do deal with what you would think you would deal with in a very male-oriented business. But I think it's very important as a woman to present yourself as a professional, to make sure that, I always felt like regardless of what anyone else wanted to say or do, what was important was how I presented myself. And I always made sure that I was never using a woman, being a woman in an inappropriate way or in a flirty way. I just would ignore, I would just kind of handle myself. And I think that with men, in my experience, if you just showed them that you were serious and you had something important to say, the teasing or anything that you ran into kind of stopped. So I just never allowed it to be an issue for me. I just kind of powered through it. And if somebody was truly inappropriate, which didn't happen too much, I would just address it directly and just say, hey, I'm not comfortable with this. And again, normally I was okay. So,
Okay, great. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Back to the questions. Giancarlo said, when you're booking an artist for a radio station, what are some of the main things you look for, and how does the dynamic of a record company come into play?
So we look for a lot of things. One is, again, how well we think the audience is going to respond to that particular artist and what kind of draw they're going to have. The second thing is, how easy are they to work with? Because nowadays it's unbelievable how difficult it could be. So I don't think the artists actually realize how much we do factor this in, but a lot of times if I'm familiar with an artist or their manager or their record label and I know it's going to be difficult and I know it's just as easy for me to book somebody else who's great to work with, I'm going to go with who's easier to work with. Sometimes it's a financial thing. If we only have a certain budget and we can only afford a certain level artist, then that obviously comes into play. And last but certainly not least for me is how good of a partner that artist has been to us, because we've had a lot of people that are great, great partners to us, and then their next song isn't the smash that the last one was. And I think, in those cases, we try and give them the benefit of the doubt because they've really been a good partner. So I think it really becomes a two-way street.
Joe, I'll ask a couple of interesting questions. This one, what are the advantages and disadvantages of working in such a fast-paced industry?
Okay, so the advantages are that it's fun. It's always changing. It's always unique. Again, it's 20 years and I'm not bored and I still look forward every day to going to work. I love what I do. I think that's the greatest blessing ever because I'm at work more than I'm at home. So, to really enjoy what I do is definitely a blessing, and that's because it's always evolving and changing, and we're doing new things. But again, it's very difficult. The challenge would be, again, I work, these are very big companies, and, they're constantly looking to cut costs or do things differently. And so, you're always worried about, how long you have before you could potentially be cut. But, that's, to me, the biggest challenge.
Job security?
Job security, yeah.
She also asked, have you been part of the planning and production of the March 29th iHeartRadio Awards?
I have. Actually, all of our data was what helped determine who those nominees were. So we don't explain a lot on TV because you have about 2 seconds or you've got like one sentence that flashes. But it was very much data driven. We went through and really looked at who had the most airplay and who had the most, sales and social, and there was a lot of things that went into that. So it was actually a very scientific way of coming up with who the nominees were.
All right. Mark wanted to know, what lessons did you learn from Craig Kitchen in the early days? And in what
Really? Did somebody ask that?
Yep. And in what ways did
Who
he
knows
inspire and
Craig
push
Kitchen?
you?
I don't know him. I just read about it.
Oh, really? Oh, that's awesome. What was the answer?
So the question was, how did you? What lessons did you learn from Craig in the early days, and in what ways did he inspire or push you?
Integrity, integrity, integrity. We were talking on the way here that he kind of ruined my life because he was one of those bosses that he was just the greatest. And when he came to the office, we all floated on a cloud because I loved the way he did business. He did the right thing, not the right thing for us. And he was very much relationship driven. He was about, really being loyal and respectful to the staff. And the greatest thing about him is, I'm not, I'm obviously on my best behavior now, but I'm definitely a unique personality. I come from Staten Island. My accent was way thicker back in the day. I've practiced it. So he was the kind of guy that was able to identify unique people with different talents and not try and put us all in a box. He just let us be us, and he really encouraged that. And he created an atmosphere where, he really helped foster everybody to be the best that they can be. And we were all very much about loving each other and working together and rolling up our sleeves and doing anything that was or wasn't our job. So he created really an atmosphere that allowed me to be at one company for 20 years and turn down double my salary at any given time during my career because I'd rather work for Craig Kitchen than make more money, which people thought was crazy. But I really believe happiness is a huge factor in your life versus money, and the rest of it works itself out. So it was a great lesson to learn of how to treat my staff now, and on how to work with other people around me and how to just conduct myself as a business person.
Here's another question that'll surprise you. Asked by Michael, what specific qualities do you think Darren Davis saw in you that distinguished you from others?
Okay, that's interesting. Well, Darren Davis and I know each other for over 20 years, well, about 20
You
years.
should explain who Darren Davis is.
Okay,
Yes,
Darren Davis is now my current boss. He started as one of my clients many, many, many years ago, but over the years, both of our jobs have kind of changed, and most recently, he became my boss, and he's another person who's been in the company forever and
But
worked his way up.
Isn't there a lesson there, though? So he was a little programmer in a market, and you were trying to get him to carry your programming.
Exactly.
So if you didn't treat him nicely back then,
Exactly.
he could come and bite you in the butt.
I think the number one mistake people make is not being nice to the assistant. The assistant, most of the time, really runs the show. And people I think, are very dismissive. I've run into people that are very dismissive or judgmental based on title, and I think that's absolutely crazy. I don't care what your title is or who you are in a company. I'm going to treat you exactly the same. And that's definitely worked out. Again, it was very lucky for me that was something I was taught very early on, because Darren is now my boss. And had I been mean to him all those years ago, he probably wouldn't be my boss and I wouldn't have my current job. So thank you, Darren Davis. But again, I think for me, I've been fortunate that I am very unique and I am very relationship oriented, which has been probably the best strength in me having a long, good career, because I was nice to people and they were nice to me and we did good business. And again, over those years, we all grew up, and people that I was an intern with now became the heads of companies. And because we were all good to each other and loyal, that ended up working in my favor. So Darren recognizes my relationships and my passion. I'm a little passionate about things, and a little obsessive. So I think he recognized that. And I think loyalty is the key. I mean, I was loyal to Darren before he was my boss, and I think that was something that made him feel good about me working for him was knowing that I would be loyal.
Alexis asks, what do you think you'd be doing if you were not an executive vice president today?
That's a very good question. Well, originally it was the law career, but I'm not sure I would have made it there. I don't know, because I feel like this was tailor-made for me, and I don't really know that
Was it tailor-made for you, or did you create it?
I created it, but
Okay,
but I took my passions and things that I cared about and turned it into a perfect job. So yeah, kind of goes both ways. But I probably would have been doing something similar. I just don't know what.
All right. Cole asks, what reasons do you think iHeartRadio has been so successful compared to Pandora, Spotify, and other online music sites?
Well, the one thing that we obviously have over those others is we do have the radio stations and the other assets. So where Pandora and Spotify are just more, music collection or, they're just that one thing. We're lots of things. We're events, and we're radio stations, and we're websites, and we're personalities. I call it the friend factor. When Elvis Duran talks to you, a lot of people really think he's their friend. And when he recommends something, they care, and there's just that personal connection. And certainly you see it with like 9/11, or you see it when other things happen. Radio is community. And, we like to say that, your iPod or some of the streaming services are where you go when you want to escape, and radio is where you go when you really want to connect. So the fact that we have that connection and those other extensions, I think, are definitely what differentiate us from the other ones.
All right. Carrie asks an interesting question here. What are some of the major reasons why it's so hard to get independent artists on the radio? And have you ever had an artist that you truly believed in that wasn't able to get play because of that?
Story of my life, yes, unfortunately. Really what's difficult about it is, unfortunately, at the end of the day, it is a business. And what happens a lot of times with independent artists is they don't really have the funds and the resources that the other artists do. And because there are so few songs played on the radio now, which I don't necessarily love, but it is a reality, it's very difficult for those artists to be the choice when, a radio station isn't sure if I start playing the song, are you going to be able to do a 200 city show like that other artist is? Are you going to do big promotions with us? Are you going to be able to, fly to the iHeart Festival for hundreds of thousands of dollars? I mean, there's a lot of things that go into it, but I think it's mostly because, they don't always have the resources to compete with the major labels. But I also think I don't personally like that. I'm very much the person in our company who tries to help the independent labels get in, because sometimes it's just a matter of, these program directors, their job is very different than it was years ago, where their job was picking the music for the radio station, and now they're just more running a business. They barely even have time for that. So if they can return 3 phone calls a day, it's going to be 3 people they know versus, that stranger on the phone that they don't really know. So sometimes it's really just access. People have a hard time just getting access to some of these decision makers, and that, is an issue.
It seems very difficult in this day and age for an independent artist to get there without partnering up. And an independent artist can get so far, and then they have to decide whether they want to play the game or not.
Yeah. And I can't even tell you how many artists I have that I have tried to help that I would have bet my house on that they were going to be famous and just couldn't get it going anywhere. So it is rough. It's amazing because, again, there are songs I hear that I'm like, how is this not a #1 song? And it just doesn't get the chance. And then there are songs that you hear and you're like, really? This is on the radio? And it's just, it's such a, it's like a magical, formula that you can't possibly predict, because timing and relationships and what else is on at that time and who your record label is, and there's so many factors that have to line up that it's
but you often go out of your way and try to find vehicles or things in your arsenal that you might be able to help somebody to get to the next level.
100%. Because I also, the other thing I've run up against a lot is there's a lot of crooks out there, and they make a lot of promises that they can't keep. And there is a lot of money that goes into this, and a lot of times it's some 16-year-old girl whose parents are literally spending every penny they have to try and get her somewhere, and you have some guy promising for $100,000 he's going to get you on the radio, which is not true, and they don't know that. So I'm very aware of trying to make sure people don't spend $1, because it is easy nowadays because of consolidation. I mean, I like to say I can make 5 phone calls for you and know whether you kind of have a shot or not. And so I'll actually try and do that for independent artists to make sure they don't waste the money, because if I send it out to a bunch of programmers and they're not really excited about it, I kind of know that they can spend all the money they want and it's not going to really work. So don't ever spend money for no reason if you're a musician.
Valerie asks you, it has been said that your connections and relationships within the industry are unmatched. How did you work to build such meaningful and powerful connections? And do you have any advice for us in the way of us building our own networks?
Yeah, so I kind of talked about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the key is, I always like to say I have to go to sleep at night knowing that what I did was the right thing. So I think it's so important, especially as a salesperson for me, it was always about building relationship and not about making a commission. I think sometimes people look at things in the short term and think there's a short-term benefit to them, but they don't really think about the long-term benefit of establishing a really good relationship. So I think it's about being honest with people. It's about being loyal to people, and it's really, I always say, do the right thing and the rest will follow. So and again, it was not selling products that I didn't believe in, or if I didn't believe in it, I kind of told the truth. So if I called up a radio station, I'd be like, listen, I don't think this show is the greatest, but I have to get it on. Is there any way we could kind of talk about this, and how can I make this work for you? And so, and I also think, just being good to people, again, it doesn't matter what someone's title is, because the president today can be unemployed next week, and the intern of today is going to be, next year's president. You really just don't know, so you shouldn't really worry about whether or not you're going to benefit from someone or whether they can help you. Just be good to people, and I think people appreciate realness. For me, it's just, again, it's an untraditional style to kind of be the way I am sometimes, but I think it's worked for me because people can smell bullshit and they don't like it, and when they know you're being real, it helps you establish a good relationship. So, you just have to be a good person and do the right thing. You have to do good business.
All right, question from Justin. With iHeart being relatively new, assumption is it's probably been difficult competing with other platforms for music. For example, the iHeart Music Awards will take place March 29th on NBC. What has it been like competing with all those other award shows like the Grammys and the VMAs?
Yeah, so you're 100% right. And it's happened with us with a lot of our tentpole events out of the gate, because even though we're a big company and everybody knows who we are, there isn't a proven track record for some of these. So for last year's award show, we were literally begging people, and Drake got off the plane and decided he didn't feel like showing up anymore, and and you go through all these different things, but the best way you can really compete is just success. So after we did the first one and it was a success, this year I think you guys are going to love the lineup. It's pretty good. And so again, it's just you have to prove yourself, and even though we're the biggest, you can't act that way. You have to remember that this is a new thing you're doing, and you have to be humble and beg, and just try and prove yourself, really.
What I enjoyed about it was, I think it was last year, or maybe the last 2 years, the categories were so different from the Grammys.
Exactly, which is
and
what
they
we're
were
purposely
really
trying to do.
very pertinent categories,
Yeah.
rather than, best Latin accordion or whatever.
Exactly.
But it really struck me. I mean, it was something that...
And that's something, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something that was a big discussion internally, was how do we differentiate ourselves from these other shows? Because there is a point where how many award shows can you watch that have the same exact awards? So we did try and come up with categories that were unique and interesting, or that weren't being covered with the other awards. And, hopefully we've, it sounds like we're hitting that, which is good.
It's an interesting question, and we can put all the rumors to rest right now. So Devin asks, what does it take to make Billboard's most powerful women in music list?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I compete with Billboard, and I've spent most of my career trying to bring them down. And then I was like, oh, wait, this is awesome. But just getting nominated by all those wonderful, nice people that I've known for a long time, and that's how it happened, I guess.
So you really don't know. It's a secret formula.
It's a secret formula because, they get nominations and why they decide to pick some and not others. But obviously, I do have a very prominent job in the industry, and there aren't as many women as there, could be. And so...
And you're good at what you do, and you're popular with people because you don't BS them.
Exactly.
Kaylin wanted to know what you think are some of the major differences between internet radio and terrestrial radio, and what do you do to fuse them together into a business?
Well, the differences, there's a couple of differences. So one of the positive things for the internet is that they actually have more flexibility, and they don't have to stick to as tight of a we stick to our format very closely. So I feel like on the internet you're able to definitely go far outside of the genre and really experiment more and do things that radio isn't willing to take a risk. But the interesting thing about that question is that's the whole reason why the company created iHeartRadio, the app, because we knew that this was definitely something that is part of the future. So rather than pretending it didn't exist or not, or denying that it was going to be an actual competitor, we thought it would be smart to get into the business as well. So we used it as an extension of our radio brands versus a competitor to our radio brand. So for us, now we want to give you the content wherever you want to hear it, because again, it's the consumer that's deciding what they want. So if you guys all like to listen to your phones now versus an AM FM radio, we want to be able to deliver you Z100 the same way that you would hear it on your radio. And that's how we've been able to make it a successful model, by hedging our bets and saying, okay, if you're not listening to radio as much, at least we're going to get you over here or over there. And so
I used to work for Greater Media,
oh, awesome.
and I know they actually, I believe, are iHeartRadio now too.
They're on iHeartRadio. I'm pretty sure we stream their stations.
Okay.
Did you work at a station?
BHA and WMTR.
Oh, okay.
You can't hear me.
Hey, all right.
So where it says on, you actually utilize that. Okay. So sorry, it's new technology. But when I was there and we had online streaming radio, the ads for the online had to be different from what was
Yes.
being broadcast. Is that still the case? And
Yes.
why are the ads different?
It's a union thing, so you can't have the same commercials online that you do on air. So same thing. So we actually have different commercials that we put in that become stream fill. What's cool about that is we can actually use that time for other things. So actually part of our another initiative we have for new artists is our digital artist integration program. And that's where we'll take new artists and create like a 1-minute get to know you piece. And we'll actually use that instead of the commercials that might be running on the terrestrial station. And there's also the DMDC, which is kind of regulates digital, and there's a lot of rules you have to stick to. So we can, there are different rules in terrestrial versus digital. So a lot of times digital also becomes a good place for us to play new songs that we want to expose to the audience, but we wouldn't play on terrestrial yet. So that's actually a great way to get exposure for artists too, because again, a lot of the digital audience is almost as big as what a traditional radio station in a different market might be. So like Z100 online is actually, I think, as big as PLJ is terrestrially. So it's great exposure for an artist, but it's a union thing with the whoever's voicing the commercials. That's why they can't do the same commercials. Yeah.
Is Jess Frank here? So Jess, so you're interning at a radio station in New Jersey?
Yeah.
So do you want to address your question, because you, as an observer?
Okay, now it's working.
So you're an intern at this radio station in New Jersey, and you've experienced watching how difficult it is for new music to get played. So did you want to pose the question?
Sure, I guess. I mean, I don't really remember exactly what I wrote, but I mean, I know that they set up like within a week or something, they already put down like what's going to be played and everything, and they don't really switch that too often. And most of like the requests that actually you're like saying to people, like play this, play this, play this, is part of the top 40 already and is actually going to be played anyway. That's why when you request it, it comes on like, you know, a half hour later after they say, oh yeah, we're going to play it like within 5 minutes.
So wait, can I ask what radio station it is?
I work at 101.5.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah.
Jersey 101. Yeah, I mean, yeah, radio it's theater, it's entertainment, and it's not live and like it used to be. So, you know, like we talked about earlier, a lot of it is syndication that's pre-programmed, or the music is predetermined by the program director, and it is hard to get new music on. It's really frustrating because we believe in playing things over and over and over because somebody told us that's how
Repetition is the
repetition
mother
is.
of learning.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, it just is the way it is.
So the other part of the question Jess asked was would you think college radio might be a way to go for exposure for new
Oh,
artists?
absolutely. And I think, you know, there's non-commercial stations as well. I mean, I guess it depends on what format an artist is, but certainly college radio, college campuses, and that's what a lot of artists are doing now. I mean, in a weird way, you almost have to have a story and a hit before a record label even signs you. So a lot of people, again, are out there building themselves digitally, you know, socially. They're making sure that they're building fans before they ever get anywhere near radio. I mean, a lot of times you have to have 1 million YouTube views and, you know, 100,000 followers and all this before you even get a record deal. So I definitely think, you know, it's great for an artist to be out there, you know, playing. I think it's always good to keep playing out live, like just even if it's 20 people, you know, at an event, just constantly building your fan base and getting familiarity, because you can use all of those people to kind of spread the awareness nowadays. So I think there's a lot of ways.
Here's an interesting question from Amanda. It's said that failure leads to success. Have you had an incident when a failure has led to greater opportunities? That's a tough one.
Yeah, I had one interesting. I had one catastrophe at work. Now, I know that they say women executives should not cry, but I had one particular catastrophe at work where I was crying so hard that the guy on the other end of the phone kept trying to get me off, and I just wouldn't let him go because I could not accept that he wasn't going to do what I needed, because it was really going to be bad for me. This was going to be a big failure, bad thing if it went down. So I kept on crying and crying and crying, and eventually he couldn't take it anymore. So he said, all right, fine, I'm going to go back one last time for you. And he went to the chairman of the company, and they ended up fixing it because I was crying so hard. And I thought this was the worst thing ever. It was humiliating because I'm like, this is exactly why people, you know, say women or, you know, shouldn't be executives, they cry. And the chairman of the company actually offered me a job because I was like, but I cried. He's like, you don't understand. He goes, you got the entire Disney Corporation that has the worst red tape in the world to change everything to accommodate you. That is someone I want working for me. So sometimes, you know, what you think is bad is actually something really good.
That's a great story. That's great.
I'm not recommending crying, but it worked in that case.
Sierra says, what advice would you have for a marketing and music management student here at William Patterson who's looking for an internship? Would a radio station such as Z100 be the best place to look for one?
I mean, I think you should open it up, right? Because music marketing could be a label, it could be a radio station, and even nowadays it can be an advertising agency. And I think what would be great is to be as well-rounded as possible. So again, I think social is a big thing, and not everybody is great at it. So making sure that you are, you know, practicing your skills in social, in digital, and traditional is great, but I think you can have a wider window of where you intern, because internships are hard to come by. So as long as you get in with a good company that does music-oriented programs, I think it's okay, regardless of where you kind of try and get in. But I think the more skills you have, the better, because that will make you stand out from everybody else. And, we talked about this in the car too. Just go get coffee. Like, I mean, nowadays I feel like, you definitely want to learn something in an internship, but you also, I spent 3 years at my internship. They're like, when is the internship over? I was like, 3 years ago. And I was stapling things in the middle of the night. And even now, I said, if somebody told me they needed me to crawl on the floor and tape things and it wasn't my job, but someone at work needed it, I would still do it. I think it's kind of important to, develop that concept of I'm never too good for anything and I'm willing to always over-deliver. And I always, you always want to kind of help your coworkers. And I think that's an important thing, is to not, expect that you deserve anything at work. I think even 20 years in, you just got to keep earning it. And
I think the era of internships is a little bit under fire right now because of all the lawsuits. And I think a lot of the companies, I believe Condé Nast eliminated their internship
we're
program.
pretty much almost there because, people don't want to get sued. And it's a shame because, again, I totally understand that nobody wants to spend, 3 months getting coffee for people. And I honestly would never do that to interns. But on the other hand, my internship is what led to my career at the end of the day. And I think internships can be incredible opportunities if you get in with the right place and you really, show them. So it's kind of like more important to get in and really create relationships and prove what you can when you can, but still not, be above getting somebody coffee if that's honestly what they want. I mean, again, it shouldn't be what your internship is, but that's kind of sometimes what comes along with it.
I know in our department at SiriusXM, there's 2 interns who have joined the department of the company based upon their internships. When a full position opened, I mean, it's the obvious place where you're going to go find a candidate. You have somebody who interned, they kind of know how that department works and the lay of the land, and they know where the bathroom is, and they know where the coffee machine is, and they know all that stuff, and that sort of counts. And so, all things being equal, you want to go with somebody who has some level of knowledge and experience of the place you're working. And if internships disappear, that would be a bad thing.
Yeah, and I don't think most people, I think it's a joke, the whole go get me coffee kind of thing. I think in most cases that isn't what's going on, and it's a great opportunity. I think it's, if you do get in and get an internship, it's great to say, hey, can you introduce me to other people in the company? I mean, a lot of times we like to walk the interns around to all the different departments so they can get exposure to different things. Because again, I thought I was going to be a lawyer who was going to be a counselor, who ended up being in radio, working with music artists. So who knew, right? But I think sometimes what you think you want to do isn't always what you end up doing or what you actually do love to do once you do it. So it's good to kind of, ask to talk to other people in the company. Something else that I think is kind of cool is, if you get an internship or even a new job at some point, is identify that person in the company that you respect and that you want to be like, and kind of tell them that and go to them and say, hey, listen, I really, I want a mentor, or I really respect the way you do business. Do you mind if I take you out for a cup of coffee? Do you mind just spending 15 minutes with me so I can just, ask you? I think it's great to, find those executives that you respect and want to be like, and kind of ask them to, get a little bit of their time here and there. And I think they would actually appreciate that in a lot of cases.
At the end of the semester, an intern finishes their internship. I go, well, I'm leaving here. While you're there, take advantage.
Exactly.
Take advantage of it. Don't wait till the last week of your internship and walk around with your resume. I think, solid advice is to use it while you can.
Yep.
A lot of the questions have to do with the role of being a woman in the business. A lot of them want to know what the qualifications are to make a song get on the radio, what's the criteria for airplay, and we've kind of answered many of those. A different question here comes from Kaylee, where she's asking, with the constant rise in social media and technology in recent years, would you say this is a way that newcomers, there's got to be a change here? Is there a different way for newcomers to approach a career in the industry? And if that is in fact the case, what career advice might you provide someone?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was kind of just touching on, is that, there's all these new jobs now that, I have to be honest, I'm horrible at tweeting. And so, the people that are coming in that know every new platform from Snapchat to, I can't even keep track of half of them. I mean, if you're someone who really knows those new technologies and is ahead of the curve and is bringing in a skill set and an understanding that a lot of other people in the company don't have, that's a great thing. So I think there's a whole range of jobs that are going to come out of all of these social and digital and new technologies that are being created. So I definitely think that anything you choose, you should try and at least have some sort of digital knowledge and training, because there's no question that's the future. So I think it's something to focus on.
Bobby wants to know that what is iHeart's greatest source of income other than advertising?
That is other than advertising.
Maybe subscriptions?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean
it's
advertising
designed.
definitely is the number one.
The reason?
I mean, just events. I mean, I guess.
Well, I guess
that doesn't really count. Ticket sales, but I guess but
it's all about advertising.
it's all advertising, pretty much. Yeah. That's how we kind of stay alive.
That's the fuel, keeps the machine running. Bianca said, or asked, do you feel like the work you did and the courses you took at NYU helped you after you graduate to get a job within the music industry?
Nope. Nah, I'm kidding. But really, I was a counseling. I have a master's in counseling. So the only way it really helped me was obviously because I'm a sales person. It definitely helped me relate to people and work with them better. But I don't know that the actual degree is what helped me get the job. I mean, I got the job and then I just proved myself. And so I don't know that anyone even knows half the time where my degree was, what it's in, or where it came from. So, no, not totally.
Any of you have questions of the moment you want to ask? Yes, sir.
Okay. You mentioned earlier about the power of syndication. Hello? Okay. You mentioned earlier about the power of syndication, that if you have a new single and you play it once, 300 radio stations will immediately hear it. And that's really powerful for a new single coming out, because sometimes singles take a week, some of them take months.
Right.
And I was wondering, I was looking at Mediabase last night at the Daily Chart, how Jason Derulo with his new single debuted 22. What kind of strategy goes behind that to push a single to get up that high in its first day? Is that really, using the syndication to your advantage, or are there other strategic ways that they do that to push a single like that?
That's a great case of that was an initiative that we did. We do a lot of world premieres now. So what we're doing with the world premieres is we're debuting a single and then we're playing it every hour on all of the appropriate radio stations. So again, when you're Jason Derulo, or more importantly, when you're Taylor Swift or Justin Timberlake, or somebody that can actually go across multiple formats, it's starting to set records constantly now on the charts of how quickly you could go. And in that particular one, we also, for the first time, partnered with Shazam, so that every time you heard the song, you could Shazam it and enter to win a contest, which helped, with the familiarity. But from the Mediabase perspective, yeah, it was because we played it every hour on over 100 radio stations, and that obviously gets it up the chart a lot faster than if it's just comes out the normal speed, which would be 5 people come on, another 10 people come on the next week, and it just increases gradually.
Because I was hearing it pretty much every hour, 3 or 4 times all across the board on different stations. And I was just wondering, there had to be some big strategic push like that.
Exactly. And that's kind of, that's part of the team I work on. It's called the National Programming Platforms team. And, what we've discovered, especially a company our size and a lot of the other radio groups are doing similar things, is there's power in having 800 radio stations or 300 radio stations. So now we could go to Madonna and Taylor Swift and U2 and Mumford & Sons and say, hey, we want to do all these great promotions and different things with you, but what we bring to the table is look at all these radio stations that we can expose your song on. So we're starting to do things nationally, and especially when it's a Jason Derulo that everyone wants to get behind. So part of those, surveys that we're doing every week is trying to identify the artists that people do want to get behind at a level that big and then putting together programs to make a big splash.
All right, thank you.
I think it's funny that you're looking at Mediabase. I'm like, I won't ask whose password that is.
No, it's part of my internship.
Oh, okay, I'm only kidding. Where are you interning?
Warner.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
With who?
Steve Corbin in sales.
Oh,
Wow.
awesome.
It's a good man.
That's very cool.
Any other questions from the peanut gallery here? I'll go back then.
Yeah.
We have a peanut gallery.
Yes, we do.
Was there, with Clinton changing the FCC rules so that now we have these major conglomerate, tons of radio stations under one roof or different roofs, did it do did it do a disservice to the independent indie band or the indie artist in terms of getting airplay in some place? Because they used to start, luckily, if you could get something in a
Right.
tertiary market in Omaha or something, and then somebody in Buffalo or Pittsburgh
Yeah.
picked it up, and then it finally went to the. But it seems now that because they're owned so broadly, is it more difficult to find that terrestrial
Yeah.
first shot?
100%.
Yeah.
You know, it's a good and a bad thing, you know. It's good when, depending on which side you're on, but it's good when you have that many radio stations because, again, the power of what you're able to negotiate and the things that you're able to create and the content. But you also have one guy or two guys sometimes controlling way too much. And so it's hurt the independent radio station owners along with the independent independent artists because, again, it can help, right? Because if a guy who runs 300 radio stations likes an independent artist, it's great for you. If he doesn't, not so much. I think there's good and bad to it. I mean, a lot of the arguments against all of this have been, you know, there's not as many jobs, you know, because again, we are using syndication and voice tracking across all these radio stations. So you're not getting the next Ryan Seacrest or the next Elvis Duran's because there aren't those opportunities for people to kind of groom themselves. And it's also a business that doesn't pay a lot of money on, you know, so you don't have people that want to make $30,000 a year because they're so passionate about the music they want to play. So it's kind of not a great model in a sense for the future, even though I'm sure it'll figure itself out. But that would definitely be the downside of having, you know, the stations grouped that way. And it's hard, again, when you're an individual station owner and you're up against a company like mine, the odds of you getting the promotion over us is pretty slim.
I listen to a more like independent radio station, 90.7, and I know it probably doesn't. I don't know if the iHeartRadio like has that on its station, but I was just wondering if, since it's a smaller station and like there's popular songs that may get more plays, but they're not stuff you hear on the radio, does that hold less water than like songs that would be played over and over in multiple top 40s, as compared like because there's not as many radio stations kind of like that playing independent music.
What do you mean by it holds less water?
Like how you said, like the Mediabase or whatever, how you see like how many times a track runs. Is it not going to hold as much water, even if it gets a lot of plays and requests on that smaller station just because
No,
it's not
actually,
reaching
what's
as
interesting
many?
in Mediabase is a spin is a spin. So if you're getting a lot of spins, even on a small station, it's technically equal to the spins you're getting on a Z100. The only format where there's a difference is country. Country decided that they didn't want all spins to be equal, so we created a weighting system. So depending on how big the station is, you equal a certain amount of points. So it's actually a points-based system versus spin. But that being said, if you have a song that's gonna not be played on as many mainstream or, you know, as many stations as another song is, you're obviously gonna be hurt by the fact that you're not gonna have as much tonnage as the other songs will. So if Katy Perry's on, you know, all 172 people on the panel versus, you know, a song that's on just a couple of those, it's obviously gonna
And just
Right.
one more question, is that maybe also an outlet you look for songs that could be like or artists that could be up and coming? Because I know
Yeah,
at least on that station
100%.
I've heard like Pharrell's Happy, that was on there like at least
Yeah.
a month before, and like all of Sam Smith's stuff
And that's
as well on there
exactly what
before.
those stations are, because they're non-commercial and they're not like The Man and they don't answer to Wall Street. And so they actually are the ones taking risks and caring about, the people's opinion versus, trying to please, again.
The other cool thing about that is if they're an independent artist and they're not on a major label, because of Mediabase, there's record company people who, in the artist repertoire, A&R people, are going to look at that and see that, and it brings it to their attention. And it might be something that they
Yeah.
might want to
There's
sign
actually a
in
lot
the
of people
future.
that get signed because one radio station or two radio stations happen to be playing it a lot, and everyone's like,
tell you
"What
how
is
many-
that?"
how many
Happens
stories
a
are like
lot.
that.
Yeah, so that's definitely a good place to kind of start, because those are the stations that are more
Because
open-minded.
that's the
about what
beauty
they
of,
play.
of Mediabase and the technology is, so it's no longer a secret. So the guy in Los Angeles can see that the station 90.7 is spinning this record that maybe they're not familiar with, and they can look at local sales. They can drill down. iTunes allows you to drill down into regional markets and see things, and you can see what's going on, and we'll see what the response is. And then she's got Rate the Music, and there's all sorts of other tools they have. And
And we have a whole independent chart, so we actually have an entire chart that's just for independent artists, so we can see who's
Can they
not
see
on
that?
them.
Can they see that somewhere? They have to be subscribers.
They have to be subscribers,
Right.
unfortunately.
But it's an independent artist chart.
Yeah,
So that most of the record company A&R people are going to
we'll
be.
look at that,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's their thing.
That's their thing.
Okay. Anyone else in our? Okay. So here was a question that Nicole posed. When you were starting as an intern, did you ever see yourself ending up in the position you're in now? And
No
I'm not
way.
talking here at William Patterson. talking
No,
about your job.
definitely not, Even now, I'm like, really? How did I figure that one out? But, I all along the way, I would be like, if I just make this, if I could just have this title and do this, that's all I'll need. And then it just kept going. So, yeah, no, I don't know. I definitely didn't. Again, I'm a kid from Staten Island who's very untraditional. And so, I think people are still like, what? How'd you pull that off?
So Marla asked a question, and it's something I would probably ask as well, is being involved in all these different services you have, plus your charity work, and then your personal passion with helping musicians and record company people and unsigned artists or up-and-coming artists. Do you ever feel like it's too much for you to handle? And she wants to know what keeps you driven when everything gets so hectic. You're like the ever-ready bunny. You just keep going and going and going. And, like you said, you're going to be here tonight till 10 o'clock. You're going to get home. And tomorrow morning you've got a charity breakfast meeting at God knows what time. And and then you'll go to work and you just keep going.
There are definitely days when I'm like, I can't do it. But again, I think you have to go out and find what you love to do, because a lot of times, even on my worst day, I say to myself, you know what? Even on my worst day, this is better than a lot of things that I could be doing. And for me, I have it's probably the most adult office I've ever had, because I've hidden a lot of my tchotchkes, but I've kept souvenirs of all my little passes and all my little things from over the years. So sometimes when I'm just having a rotten day in the office, I like to just look around and be like, oh wow, you did that and that, and it just reminds me of the fun. And I also think I'm very blessed in that a lot of the people I've worked with are lifers like me. So some of my staff, we've been together anywhere from, again, 20, 15, 10 years. So they're my friends. They're almost like my family. I vacation with some of them. So when you enjoy the people you work with and work for, it helps really keep you going back every day. Because, I think you have to be happy. I think if you're just going somewhere every day and you're miserable, you just have to look for something else. But I will say this. I didn't get married till I was 41. I'm going to be very blunt here. I just got married 2.5 years ago, and almost 3. And I don't know that I had the proper balance, until I was older. And I think it's really important that you keep a proper balance in your life between professional and personal. And I made it, thank God. I just at the last minute, but I escaped. But I think it's really important to really know what is important in life, and it's family and it's friends, and it's great to be successful, but not at the cost of the other things in your life that are really important. Because there does come a time in your life you're like, okay, yeah, I've achieved this, but you know what? These people don't really care about me like these people care about me, and you have to make sure you're putting your attention evenly spread across what's important in your life. It's a very honest answer, but that's important to kind of put out there, because you get caught up in wanting to succeed and working, and I think you have to put that in when you're young, and you have to put in the hours, but don't lose sight of what's really important in life, that's all.
So I think what we've learned this evening is loyalty, honesty, and the one thing that runs through everything you said this evening, and I think everybody should understand that and take that to heart, or take it to iHeart, is the P word, your passion for everything. So I appreciate your passion of taking the time here and traveling through the rain and sitting in traffic and getting lost and all that, and coming here tonight to talk with the students here and giving them some solid, honest advice, and I really appreciate
Thank you
that.
for having me.
And I think they all appreciate that too.
Can I ask one favor back? I would love for anyone that doesn't use iHeart, or anyone who does use iHeart, I would love for any feedback from you guys in terms of, us versus Pandora or Spotify, or just us in general. I would love to know what you like, what you don't like, want totally honest opinions on it. So if anyone feels like, spending an hour in there and just, messing around and giving some feedback, I would love that, because we really do care what you guys think, and it would be helpful.
And the best way to get feedback to you?
I could give my email, or they could send it to you. I don't know what you prefer, but
If you're okay getting emails,
yeah, sure.
just go ahead.
It's my name, Alissa, P as in Paul, Ollack, Alissa Pollack at iHeartMedia.com.
Okay, thank you.